Welcome to VERSED, the ASCAP podcast. I'm Eric Philbrick. Welcome to fall, everybody. The leaves are falling, the temperature is falling, and we're falling in love with great music from our members. Later in the episode, I talked to Joe Block, hailed by Jazz at Lincoln Center as one of jazz's most promising young composers and a recent winner of an ASCAP Foundation Herb Alpert Young Jazz Composer Award. But first, Emmy Award-nominated singer, songwriter, and composer Ingrid Michaelson has touched the hearts of millions with her music for years. With hits like The Way I Am, Girls Chase Boys, and You and I, she has perfected her pop songcraft and carved a unique path through the music industry. She is one of today's most successful independent artists, releasing her music on her own label, Cabin 24 Records, and scoring music for such TV hits as Hulu's Little Fires Everywhere and Tiny Beautiful Things, and was executive music producer for Apple TV's Slumberskins. Recently, Ingrid was seen as a guest star in Season 3 of Netflix's Girls 5 Eva, and starred in the indie film Humor Me alongside co-stars Jermaine Clement and Elliott Gould. This year, she made her Broadway debut as a composer, writing the music and lyrics for the musical The Notebook, based on the best-selling book and hit film, and she also produced the Notebook original Broadway cast album. Ingrid's latest album, For the Dreamers, is a collection of 9 original songs and 3 treasured classics from the Great American Songbook. It mixes pop, jazz, and bossa nova, evoking the bygone musical beauty of Frank Sinatra, Judy Garland, and Astrud Gilberto. For fans of cinematic, orchestral music, the album is a golden-hued, warm musical hug just when we need it most in these anxious times. Here's my conversation with the divine Ingrid Michaelson. Ingrid Michaelson, thanks for joining us. It's always a treat to get to spend some time with you. You've been so busy. You have a new album, very exciting, For the Dreamers. It's beautiful, it's ethereal, it's transportive, and it is really a new high watermark for you, I would say, in your illustrious career. What led to you wanting to make an album like this?
Well, first of all, thank you. That's a very nice introduction. I've been working on a Broadway musical based off of the book and the movie, The Notebook, and I've been working on it since 2017. So a very large chunk of my life, my creative life, has been wrapped up in this musical. And I really wanted to kind of submerge myself in the Great American Songbook because so many of those songs are from musicals, from many decades ago. And I just wanted to kind of steep myself in those melodies and those lyrics. And so in writing the Notebook, the music for the Notebook, I think that things kind of shifted a little bit inside of me in terms of where my ear would go and where my instinct would lead me, just slightly. And I thought, well, this would be a really cool record at some point, but I couldn't really use too many parts of my brain. So I really wanted to focus just on the show. And so I figured, well, when the show is out or when the show is kind of near completion, I'll start working on my record. And that's, what we did. We had our out of town try in Chicago in 2022, and I started working on my record that year, and came together in about a year and a half, almost 2 years. But I wanted an extension, I think, of what I had been marinating in for so many years.
Was there something different about the music you wrote for The Notebook that was presented to a live audience night after night and created this experience in a theater that was different from the songs that you would write for a studio album?
Yeah, studio records for me tend to be, how can I say this? They're simpler for me. I do tell stories in my songs, but I use a lot of metaphor and a lot of repetition. And with a musical, you have to be pushing forward a narrative. You have to tell the audience what these characters are thinking, and you have to be really specific in moments. And And my solo stuff tends to be sort of macro to micro. I like to open my arms to interpretation. I want people to hear my music and to feel like they can use it to sort of soothe whatever wound it is they have. And we all have such different wounds. So I tend to, and this isn't really something that I think of when I write my own, solo stuff. It just, in interviews, honestly, is where I've sort of realized this about myself, is that I shy away from being too specific because I really want everyone to be able to to get something out of the music. And with Notebook, I had to be really specific. Um, and you got to take people from A to B. You can musicals are magical. A character can all of a sudden make this gigantic choice in the span of 3.5 minutes. You know what I mean? Because they're singing and you're suspending your disbelief because they're singing. So in suspending your disbelief, you then do believe they can make this decision in 3.5 minutes because they're singing. It's this cyclical, magical fantasy world that we're all living in. Um, so that's the biggest difference. But there are so many, there's more similarities than there are differences for me. It's, a beautiful melody, lyrics that flow in a really interesting way and that hit the core of people.
Right. So The Notebook isn't just any story. It's based on a best-selling book and a movie that's really become a cult classic for a whole generation of people. Was that daunting, or was it easy to latch on to these characters and the themes and to work with the director, Michael Greif and Becca Brunstetter, these two very accomplished theater people? Did that make your job easier?
Well, definitely having an amazing creative team helps tremendously. Becca Brunstetter, the book writer, she and I clicked from the very beginning, and we loved working with each other, and we sort of finish each other's sentences. Our director, Michael Greif, he came on in the beginning and then brought on a co-director, Shelley Williams, and the two of them together were just really wonderful. They would find places where songs needed to be. We need a song. This can't be dialogue. This has to be a song. And so I'd go into my corner and work on a song, come back and play it for them. And they would give me thoughts and notes, and I would go back and perfect. And it was very collaborative. Um, but in terms of the story, yeah, the storyline for me, it's life. It's a generational love story um, about loss and commitment and love, and I those are all things that I feel we all are so tapped into if we allow ourselves to be. I knew that I could make that story sing. When I was offered well, I wasn't really offered the job. The lead producer pointed at me and in a meeting, and he said, "Oh, the Notebook would be good for you." And I thought that meant you're hired, but it didn't mean you're hired. It just meant you'd be a good candidate. And so I wrote song after song after song. I just kept sending him songs, and eventually he hired me um, because the songs were good and they made sense with the story, and it set a really good tone for the piece. Um, we wanted to go against the grain of this uber romantic, romanticized, heightened lore that surrounded the movie
Yeah.
and break it down and make something smaller and more of a chamber piece. So we never felt in competition with the movie, and we never felt like we had to live up to expectations necessarily because we were sort of taking it and putting it on its side a little bit.
Right.
We always said, if you want to see the movie, you can see the movie. And if you want to see the play, you come see the play. It's a companion, not a photocopy.
Right.
And I'm just so proud of what we did.
So if that experience led to this new album, that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful album. Let's talk a little bit first about your choice of covers for this album, because the American Songbook is just an endless supply of beautiful lyrics, beautiful melodies. Were these specific three covers that you put on this album special to you in any way, or you just loved performing them and singing them?
Well, I had to go through a few different ones before deciding which were the ones that felt right. I mean, honestly, I could do a whole record of just songs from that era. They were just so juicy and melodic and simple and sweet, but so poignant and so well crafted. Um, so these were just the ones that felt the best to me, you know? Um, A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes is just, it's so short. The actual song, it's just a verse and chorus repeated, but it's just so sweet and so precious. And I love simplicity. I love simplicity, but simplicity that's crafted, that you know it wasn't simple to do it, but it just comes across so simple. I don't know how else to say it. And I think that that era and those songs really embody that technique.
Absolutely. And not coincidentally, the three cover songs, the classic songs that you included are all written by ASCAP members. So What a Wonderful World was written by Bob Thiel and George David Weiss. And A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes was written by Mac David, Al Hoffman, and Jerry Livingston. You Make Me Feel So Young, Joseph Miro and Matt Gordon. I would say that your songs on this album are also simple, even though I'm sure they weren't always simply written. I really love the song at the end, Backyard. I know you performed that on the Today Show earlier this year. It's the last track, but it is so powerfully moving and simple and beautiful. Do you want to just maybe tell us the story about how that song came to be?
Yeah, I was in Chicago working on the Notebook, and we were close to opening for our out of town tryout. And I was still tinkering with things for Notebook and working on things, and I just felt this wave of imposter syndrome roll over me. And I just remember thinking that everyone's gonna hate it. They're gonna hate the music. The music is crap, and I'm crap, and all this stuff. And I was sitting at the piano trying to chip away at this one song for the Notebook, and I thought, you know what, let me just stop and let me write whatever it is that I'm feeling. Let me not try to tell a story. Let me not try to fit a character's narrative into something. Let me just write. And I wrote Backyard in a matter of minutes. And another very recent revelation I've come to realize about myself is that I can be quite negative, and a lot of times I can see the glasses as half empty. But when I write music, there's this inner little positive Care Bear that comes out. Almost like uh, it's this silver lining that runs through me that I don't really know is there until I start singing or writing. And the song to me felt like a reminder that I am on the right track, and I shouldn't be seeking for validation outside of my own heart. And if I love what I'm doing, and if I know what I'm doing is valid, that's all I can do. That's kind of where the song came from. Um, and it did make me feel better. There was a catharsis in it, and I don't quite remember what I did after. I don't think I went back to the Notebook. I think I probably watched TV and went to sleep or something. But it was a special moment, and I have the voice note on my phone that's dated, and I remember exactly where I was, and on my travel piano that they rented for me in my corporate housing high rise in Chicago. Um, yeah, that's where that came from.
That's beautiful. The other song that really stands out is the song Only You that you perform with the album's producer, Arisa. Such a great song with the Latin feel to it. Talk a little bit about working with Arisa and what it was like to collaborate on this project with him.
I met Ariza in 2021. I was in a co-writing session for somebody else, and he was the producer. And I just fell in love with his work and his production and his orchestrations and how he could oscillate from, you know, pop to classical to jazz. He just has that brain that is plugged into everything musical. And I asked him if he'd want to work with me, and he was, you know, so sweetly honored because my records were, he said one of the reasons why he wanted to go into producing, because he's a big fan of my music growing up. And that was really lovely to hear. And we just work so well together. I think because he grew up listening to me, it's horrible to say, um, he understands my vocabulary and really complements what I do and sort of helps me fill in the blanks from where I sort of lose my way. Um, and the first song on the record we wrote over Zoom, basically. Um, they have these plugins now where you can actually be in real time. There's no latency, there's no delay, and you can see the screen. And I would be recording the melody, the voice notes into my phone, send them to him. He'd plug them right into the Logic session. I could see it all, and then he'd put a string patch in, and it was pretty amazing. It all came together very quickly, very organically and smoothly. And I thought, this is something. I want to make a whole record with this person. And Only You, he and I wrote that together. He's Colombian, and I thought he's such a big part of this record that it felt egregious to not include him in some way. And having him sing in his native tongue seemed like just obvious. But then he made me sing in Spanish, which was terrifying. Um, but he coached me. He coached me very well through it. But yeah, I've never released anything like that before. So that was exciting. It's like a full-on Spanish English bossa nova track.
Yeah, and he totally gives Chet Baker vibes. His voice is very nice, very smooth. So speaking of stepping outside your comfort zone, have you worked on something where you were afraid of it, but ultimately it turned into a blessing for your career?
The Notebook's probably the biggest one in terms of I wanted to write it. Well, I dreamed about the idea of writing a musical, but I didn't think it was possible. And for years, I would think about it, but it just seemed so daunting. Um, and it is daunting. It takes a lot of time. It's a lot of time, and you have to be really patient and collaborative, and you can't, well, in my opinion, you shouldn't hold on to songs that don't work.
Right.
So there was a lot of throwing songs away, but that's probably the biggest. mm, it's so drawn out. It wasn't like a jumping off. Like there was one of the scariest things I ever did musically was when I decided to learn how to use a looping pedal at a Carnegie Hall show where every artist was singing an REM song to honor REM, who were sitting in the audience. And I decided to do Night Swimming and use a looping pedal that I had never used before. And so I taught myself with the help of my bass player, Chris Kuffner, who was a wizard on the looping pedal.
Mm-hmm.
And it went over beautifully, gloriously, and it worked and it was great. But that's like a little tiny micro example of something that as I stepped on that stage, I almost went blank and thought, why didn't I just play the piano? What am I doing? Why did I choose this? But I do find time after time that it's the things that scare you that really shift you forward and provide the most satisfaction, for me anyway.
You've also written for film and TV, Little Fires Everywhere, What is that experience like compared to your other roles as pop songwriter? Was it something that also sort of you found to be really fulfilling because it was someone else's project, but you had to deliver what you delivered for their project?
Yeah, so it's funny. There are these two titles, and they're both very similar. It's Tiny Beautiful Things, I co-scored, and Little Fires Everywhere, I wrote the end title song. Both shows on Hulu. Little Fires Everywhere, I was asked by the showrunner to write the final song of the show, of the moment that sort of bleeds over into the credits. And that whole show was very much about a mother-daughter relationship. And I lost my mom in 2014, and I have lots to say about it. And so I feel like that piece was really important for me. And it was a song. So it was kind of somewhere in between Ingrid Michaelson writing her own song and Ingrid Michaelson writing a song for The Notebook, because there was themes I had to touch on, but so much of those themes are things that already exist in my life. So that was kind of like a bridge between those two worlds. And then with Tiny Beautiful Things, I asked Ariza and an amazing musician, Gabriel Mann, to co-score with me. And this is also in Chicago. I was pretty busy in Chicago working on The Notebook and my record and co-scoring a TV show. But I would watch the scene, and I would sit down with the piano or ukulele, whatever I could get my hands on, and I would sing kind of theme melodies. And then I would send those to Gabe and Ariza, and they would craft these beautiful orchestrations around them. And then I would go in my closet and I would sing vocal parts that I heard that I wanted woven through. And it was a wild process that I could never do by myself, but it was really amazing because when you think about scoring and you think of your favorite scores of movies or TV shows, you really think about that melody line. Some people that are smarter than me will be hearing the French horn
Right.
line or the timpani and where that comes in. And but I'm just such a melody head that that's really where I gravitate to. And so it was really interesting to be able to co-score this TV show because I got to use my melody head and just let the scene inform where I thought things could come in and come out, and where themes would come back, and each character having their own theme, and the math of that was really interesting. And so that was unlike anything I've ever done before. And again, I don't think I could ever do it by myself, but it was really interesting and brand new for me.
One of the more impressive aspects of your career, in my view, is that you have been an independent artist from the get-go, correct?
Yeah.
You have your own label. Aside from your musical gifts and your talent and all of that side of you, what would you say are some other skills or parts of your personality that have helped you in your career to get to this point?
Hmm. Well, I do think I have a tenaciousness. It can sometimes really be a pain in the ass though, because I feel like I very rarely can sit in my moment and enjoy the fruits of my labor. I feel like there's this hand on my back pushing me to go to the next thing, um, which serves me well in terms of working on lots of projects, but I'm trying to I'm trying to figure out how to relish the moments that I'm in a little bit more. So it's a little bit of a devil angel situation with
Right.
that. But I think if you can have a good balance of that, you know, if you can if you cannot rest on your laurels and be forward thinking, but also be able to really absorb what's happening and really enjoy the moment you're in, that's really the ultimate goal. So I'm working on the second part of that.
So commercial success aside, from a creative standpoint, what does success look like for you?
So I've thought about this a lot. Because as you get older, the bar of success for me keeps moving. Um, but I think when I really, again, when I really sit and think about what I have and what I've achieved, I've already done it. I have a show on Broadway. I have, I'm looking at my platinum singles on the wall here in my office. I have so many people come up to me or email me or DM me or contact or comment or whatever, tell me beautiful stories about how I've affected their life and I've been their first song at their wedding. And so I realized that I've already done the thing that I wanted to do when I was a little kid. I've done it. So now I kind of feel like whatever else I do is just gravy. I do want to keep going. And I do have this part of me. It's like, I want this and I want that. And the commercialness of it all, right?
Right.
But there is a part of me that feels a real satisfaction and joy in the fact that I have over, at this point, it's probably close, yeah, 2 decades of my life, I've really connected with people. Again, it's really hard for me to really think about it but when I'm in these sort of interview situations, is kind of when I really have to sit and think about it. It's just really astounding that I get to live this life and I get to write music and pay my bills that way. Well, hello, what? And just affect people's lives in a positive way. I mean, what else could you ask for, really?
Your music is such an inspiration to your fans. You have a really avid fan base, I would say. But you're also an inspiration to your fellow ASCAP members, your fellow songwriters. I've watched you over the years, and you've just continued to put out great music and do new things, as we've talked about. What would be some parting words of advice for that next generation who now can sort of learn from all the successes you've had in your career? Are there some guiding lights or North Star things that you would pass on to somebody?
The answer shifts as we are in a completely different age. Um, but there's one thing that I would say remains the same, and it is surround yourself with good people. I've had the same manager for, I don't even know how many years now, since 2007. The same lawyer, the same booking agent, the same business manager. Many of my bandmates have been with me since the beginning or for many years. Find collaborators that you really trust and who have your best interests and who believe in you and who are fans of you because of your music, not because they think they can make money off of you. That's really very important. What I will also say is something that I still tell myself, which is something that I was talking about with writing Backyard, is you really have to make the art that you want to make because you think it's good. If you start making art because you think somebody else is going to think it's good, meaning if you are trying to do something because you want to fit into something that you think somebody else will like and it's not something that you like, that's the death of art. That's the death of it all. And I'm not saying I've never been there. I've been there many times. Um, but you really have to do this because you love doing it. and because you feel like you have something to offer, and because you have something valid to say. Don't do it because you want to be famous, is kind of what I'm saying. And I think there's this real weird thing happening with social media now where fame is being sort of used as a replacement word for talented.
I agree.
And the listen, fame is fame, and I get it. I get why people want that. But for the most part, that's not gonna last. And the older you get, it's not gonna feed you in a real, genuine, positive way. So if you're writing music, yeah, surround yourself with good people and stick to your guns and make the music and make the art that you want to make. And if you falter here and there, that's fine, but try to stay on that path. That's what I'm trying to do. Still.
Well, you're doing a great job, and that's a great note to end on. You talked about your team. ASCAP is so happy that you are part of our family. We're here to support you every step of the way, and we will continue doing so as long as you pursue the love of and the joy of making music.
Well, just to finish, years and years ago, when I first started writing music in my early 20s, my father, who was a publisher at Carl Fisher, he said, well, you have to register your songs with ASCAP. That's what you have to do. And so I wrote out my 5 songs and I recorded them, sent them in. I got my ASCAP cards. And so my daddy, who is somewhere in the ether, um, he told me to be ASCAP, and so I will forever be.
A smart man. Thank you, Ingrid. It was really a treat to talk to you. And the new album For the Dreamers is very beautiful. And yeah, I would encourage everyone out there to listen to that record. It seems, I know you released it earlier this summer, but it feels like a fall album as well. It goes well with falling leaves and all the colors.
Yeah, it does. It's like a cozy time record.
So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hailing from Philadelphia, Joe Block is one of the premier pianists, composers, and bandleaders working in jazz music today. While serving as the musical director for the Future of Jazz Orchestra, Block finds time to play with musicians across generations, including Wynton Marsalis, Kurt Rosenwinkel, and Leslie Odom Jr. He is a regular arranger for the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra and also writes for the Wynton Marsalis Septet, the Juilliard Jazz Orchestra, Grace Kelly, Kenny Overton, and the Jazz Orchestra of Philadelphia. Block is also the co-founder and leader of the Philadelphia Ambassador Big Band, as well as the Joe Block Quintet, where he regularly performs his original compositions. Earlier this year, he was honored with an ASCAP Foundation Herb Alpert Young Jazz Composer Award and was selected to perform with his Joe Block's Open Heart Trio at the prestigious DC Jazz Festival. I caught up with Joe on the eve of his DC Jazz performance. Here is our conversation. Welcome, Joe Block, to VERSED, the ASCAP podcast. Thanks for joining us. You have such an interesting story and arc to your career. Today, you are literally working and playing in the upper echelons of your field. But let's start by hearing a little bit about your roots and your early inspiration. I know you grew up in Philadelphia, a great jazz city.
Yes.
So maybe just give us a little bit of your origin story.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm extremely excited to perform at the DC Jazz Festival this year, and I'm even happier to be partnered with ASCAP. And I've always known about ASCAP, and to finally be connected with them and win that award this year is a huge honor. And my origin story is that I started playing piano when I was 2 years old, classical piano. In fact, I was telling my friends last night, and they were like, that doesn't make any sense. 2-year-olds don't play piano. And I was like, I don't really have any conscious memory of it, but that's what my parents tell me, so I just believe them. And from age 2 to about 12, I was heavy in the classical piano thing. So Chopin, Bach, Beethoven, Debussy, Mozart, all that. And it was something that I was definitely good at, but not necessarily something that my heart was always in. And it wasn't really until I switched to studying jazz when I was in middle school when I started to feel like my love for the music connected with my ability and all of the personal freedom and the individual expression that jazz offered alongside all of the extremely advanced technical and theoretical knowledge that was required very much interest me. And I started studying at the Philadelphia Clef Club of Jazz, which I don't know if you're familiar with that program, but pretty much anybody that has come out of Philly in the last 30 years, 40 years went there, from Christian McBride to Questlove to Kurt Rosenwinkel, Jalil Shaw, Justin Faulkner, Emmanuel Wilkins. The list goes on to people in my generation, Nazir Ebo, Dylan Band, Yasef Raha Ali. There's so many people. So it was a community that I immediately felt connected to under the leadership of the great Lovett Hines, who runs the program. So I sort of started studying there because my high school that I went to, Germantown Friends School, wasn't necessarily a place where I could really study music at the vigor I wanted. I ended up studying more classical composition and theory in my high school. But in terms of performance, I elected to go to the Clef Club on the weekends.
So was embracing jazz sort of viewed, was it sort of like the punk rock to your classical background, like
Well,
you were kind of rebelling and going after this whole new vibe?
I think ever since I was little, I remember always being interested in improvising, and I remember I would change the notes in my pieces. My teachers would get mad at me, like, "That's a minor chord. Why are you making it a major chord?" And I always had an interest in trying new things and changing things and improvising and creating on the spot. And I felt at the time as a 10, 11, 12 year old a little bit stifled by my classical piano studies because I personally think it's really hard for a young person to really emotionally connect with classical music in the way that you can when you're older, which now I'm very much connected with classical music. But at that time, jazz, like I said, it just provided a space for me to let all of that creativity out in a way that still was very structured. And because I also love structure too. So it was kind of that freedom and that structure in that Venn diagram that I really was drawn to. And I would say the first jazz piano player that I listened to that really inspired me was Oscar Peterson, without a doubt. I was just like, man, this is swinging so hard. Like, I want to swing like this. Before any other influences I got into, which later I got into many other different styles of jazz, but my first taste was straight ahead swinging Oscar Peterson trio, Ray Brown, Ed Thigpen.
Awesome. So that obviously, led you to, come to New York, pursue your craft even deeper and further. You went to Columbia and Juilliard. You had a dual degree.
Yes.
What do you think, other than continuing to develop your craft, what are some of the big takeaways from that educational phase of your life?
That was a very busy, constantly grinding time of my life. Because I was at two different schools at once, and I wasn't sleeping a ton because I was trying to study a lot and also be out on the scene and meet people and make connections and start to play gigs. So it was almost like this three-headed monster of like two different schools and then like my career. So it taught me a lot about time management. It taught me a lot about how to deal with stress, how to organize my life, how to be a really efficient practicer. Because maybe I didn't have a lot of time. I would have an hour. I have to work on something. It taught me how to expend my energy in like a healthy way, where I was getting what I needed to get done, but I wasn't burning out. Which I did burn out, obviously, but it was a really good challenge for me, and I think it gave me a lot of armor in my life to be able to deal with situations that are either high stress or involve a lot of moving around. Um, Not to mention all of the actual specific things that I learned at those schools. Like I could go down a lot of conversations about the things that I studied. I did a lot of liberal arts classes at Columbia, so I read a lot of philosophy books and history books. And then at Juilliard, I was studying with Frank Kimbrough at the time, and later with Mark Carey and Jeffrey Keyser and Ted Rosenthal, who all helped me develop a lot as a pianist and fill in a lot of the holes that I needed to fill in.
I mean, it sounds like you've had just one incredible experience or opportunity after another. But what do you consider your first real big break that you feel was sort of a milestone or turning point in what you wanted to do?
I would say when I was 16, I experienced something that probably put me on a path that I'm still kind of on. As I said, I've always been very interested in composition, both classical and jazz. And when I was 15, I applied to the Essentially Ellington composition contest at Jazz Lincoln Center, which is a part of their Essentially Ellington program. But they basically pick one composer a year that writes a chart, and then the Jazz Lincoln Center Orchestra with Wynton Marsalis, they perform it, and they give you feedback, and it's just the beginning of a relationship. So I applied to that when I was in, I think, 10th grade, and I did not get it, and I was upset and dejected. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to apply again a year later. So I ended up applying a year later, and I did get selected that year. And that was when I first met Wynton, when I first met all the people in the Jazz Lincoln Center Orchestra, all the people in the family of Lincoln Center. And now, what is it? That was 2016, 8, 9 years later. I would say that I'm very involved at Jazz Lincoln Center, and I've performed with Wynton a bunch, and I've written more music for the orchestra, and that's one connection that I think kind of put me down a certain road. Obviously, I do other things besides Jazz Lincoln Center, but I would say that's a big, 33% of what I do.
Yeah, well, that's a big one. Um, having worked so closely with Wynton and the, Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra, I mean, that's such a revered space, an opportunity, and people. What is it like to work with that group and that
Yeah.
and Wynton? I mean, that's
Well,
incredible.
sometimes it's work. Wynton is one of my favorite human beings who has inspired and challenged me so much in my life, and I probably wouldn't be here without him. But being around him is like a head trip. It's just like he's constantly challenging you and asking you questions and teaching, and it's stuff. There's stuff that he told me 10 years ago that I'm still thinking about today. And I actually recently played with him at the Blue Note in New York, and it was the same thing. It was just like challenging me to think outside of my box, think outside of my comfort zone, and which in the moment is challenging because you're trying to play and you're thinking a lot. You're in your conscious brain, and I like to be in my subconscious brain when I'm playing. So you're in your conscious brain a lot, but it's stuff that he's thinking long term. Like I want my students to think about these things their whole lives and come up with answers to, solutions to. So he's definitely someone that has forced me to really evaluate myself a lot and think about what do I value in myself, what do I value in my music, who do I value, what sort of musicians do I want to perform with, and what styles of music do I want to incorporate into my sound. And as I've done more band leading, because I have a couple groups that I band lead, and one of them I'm going to be playing with at the festival. Being around people like Wynton and other mentors I have, Kurt Rosenwinkel, other older musicians, like I said, Mark Carey before, Ted Rosenthal, people that help younger musicians edit and subtract and add and mix and just come up with our own philosophy so that we can go out into the world and do what they did.
You are multi-hyphenate now. I mean, you're a performer, a composer, an arranger, a band leader, like you said. What fulfills you about doing all those things, not just one of those things?
Yeah, I think I think the answer is in the question. I think the fact that I have the opportunities to do many different things is what fulfills me. I'm I'm I feel like every single week my gig schedule for that week is so different. For example, tomorrow I'm going to be playing with one of my favorite singers and friends up here, Stella Cole, and we're going to be playing a lot of Great American Songbook music and standards, just swinging and having fun. And then earlier last week, I played with my quintet in Philly at a jazz festival, and that's all my original music. It's a lot more modern, it's more avant-garde, and I love both of those equally. I love being able to operate in different spaces. And I've also gotten more recently involved in writing for strings and for orchestra, which is extremely challenging, but it's music I've listened to my whole life, so it's in my ear. And the challenge has been, how do I develop this relationship from the ear out into the computer program Sibelius I use. So I've also been getting more into writing for strings and arranging, like you said, and I'm also very fulfilled by that because in that setting I have a lot of control over the music and I have time to really fine tune exactly how I want something to sound.
Right. You touched upon this a little bit earlier, where you talked about the cerebral aspect of writing and creating music, but when you're performing, you want it to, you don't want to be thinking so much. Maybe talk a little bit about just how that works, how you can transition from that intellectual
Yeah.
composition side of your brain to just letting the music kind of flow out of you.
Well, this music, jazz music, whatever you want to call it, it requires the highest level of musical aptitude and understanding of how music works, especially as a pianist. Um, there's so much history you have to deal with. So the question is, how can you convert all of that into something that people that have never studied music in their life can feel? And that's where like
Right.
the human element of it and the emotional element of it, and that's filtering it through your own experience, through your own ups and downs in your life, and putting it out into the world in a way that is understandable and digestible. And a big component of that is technique. Like, do you have the ability to express your ideas in a way that's clear and with a sound, with a tone on the instrument that's going to make people feel moved? It just takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of just time devoted to the craft. And the more that you develop something in your conscious brain, it slowly starts to get into your subconscious, and then you can start to enter flow states, and you're not actually aware of what you're playing, but it's just flowing out of you. It's a very beautiful feeling that I don't experience every time I play, but when I do, it's very powerful. And I find that it happens most of the time when I'm feeling extra vulnerable in myself emotionally, and I'm down, and I'm willing to put myself actually in the music, which you might think happens all the time when we play, but it doesn't. There's a lot of times when we play when we're blocked up or we have walls up and we're just playing and it sounds good because we're professionals and it sounds good. But there's another level of playing where it's just it's more coming from your personal experience and the music is just the conduit. It's just it's the way to get to that other side.
So you're also an educator. Um, you've studied with so many great people. You speak beautifully about what you do. But what would be some of the top sort of words of wisdom you pass on to young musicians now who are hoping to have the kind of career that you're enjoying these days?
To do this, which obviously I'm not as deep into it as many of my mentors. I'm only 25, so I can only speak from the years I've had, but I have learned and tried to follow certain values. One of them is patience. I think to really succeed in this requires so much patience and long-term thinking. And it's not something that's going to happen quickly. It's not going to happen even remotely quickly. It's going to take decades to really get where you want to get. And you have to just have that. You have to have a really strong belief in yourself too. That belief sometimes for certain musicians can lean in towards ego or arrogance, and that's something that we all try to avoid. But if you can keep it more of just like a confidence in yourself, that's also really important, because this music is really hard to play, and it's also a really hard lifestyle to live. You know, living in New York City is not an easy place to live, especially when you are just grinding and just trying to work on your instrument and all the different obligations we have. You have to have a lot of confidence in yourself, that you're going to bet on yourself almost to be able to support yourself and grow in the way you want. So I would say patience, confidence, and also just like curiosity, and really just following the rabbit holes that you love. I think as students, it's really challenging sometimes because we get told what we need to work on, what we should value in music, what styles of recordings we have to work on to be an X type of musician. And a lot of that is very valid. That's why we go to school. But on the flip side, nobody has the life that we have, or the experiences that we have, or the interests or the influences that we have. So the quicker and the deeper that we can find those in ourselves, that the more true we're going to be to our musicianship and our own humanity. Because otherwise we're just going to be posing and trying to please other people.
Beautifully said. I think that's a great note to end with. Thank you again for carving out some time out of your day to talk to us.
Thank you so much.
ASCAP Citizen is our nonpartisan voter registration and awareness campaign. We've teamed up with our friends at Headcount to make sure you and your community are ready to vote in this year's election. What's at stake? The President, the entire House of Representatives, 34 Senate seats, 44 state legislatures, and countless local elections. And since roughly 3/4 of an American songwriter's or composer's income is regulated by the federal government, let's show our elected officials that they should listen to more than just our songs, because music creators vote. So go to headcount.org/ASCAP to make sure you are ready to vote in this year's election. That's a wrap for this episode. I want to thank Ingrid Michaelson and Joe Block again for being our special guests, and everyone who made this episode possible. Sarah Feingold and Eitan Rosenblum for editorial support, Tiffany Sims for graphic design, Kate Cordova and Holly Grace Jamili for social media support, MXM Tune, Rosalind Scher, and Colleen Pomeranz for our uplifting theme music, and Benjamin Keynes of Sight Sense Productions for audio and video editing. If you like what you hear on Versed, please share the love with your friends and neighbors and followers, comment on our YouTube channel, and share the podcast to help grow our community. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here real soon. Vote.